The gunshot that echoed through the Golden Rose Saloon on that sweltering August evening in 1882 changed everything, though not in the way anyone expected, as the bullet lodged itself harmlessly in the whiskey-stained ceiling while Katherine Ruth stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her crimson dress catching the lamplight like fire itself. The drunk cowhand who had fired his pistol in celebration stumbled backward into a card table, scattering chips and coins across the sawdust-covered floor, and she watched with practiced indifference even as her heart hammered against her ribcage. This was Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and the only law that mattered was the kind a man could enforce with his fists or his gun, and Katherine had learned long ago that survival meant swallowing whatever pride she had left and doing what needed to be done. She descended the stairs with careful steps, her hand trailing along the banister that had been polished smooth by countless other hands before hers. The saloon owner, a portly man named Silas with perpetually red cheeks and breath that reeked of cheap tobacco, caught her eye from behind the bar and jerked his head toward a table in the corner. Another customer, another night, another handful of coins that would disappear before morning into the hands of men who owned everything, including her time and her body. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, as though she had lived 100 lifetimes in the 3 years since she had found herself in this God-forsaken place. The man at the corner table was different somehow, though Katherine could not immediately put her finger on why. He sat with his back to the wall, a habit of men who had learned to watch their surroundings, and his hat was pulled low enough to shadow his features. His clothes were dusty from hard riding, and a pair of worn leather gloves lay on the table beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. When she approached, he looked up, and she found herself staring into eyes the color of summer storms, gray and blue mixed together in a way that seemed to shift with the lamplight. "Evening," she said, her voice carrying the practiced sultriness that her profession demanded. "Looking for company?" The man studied her for a long moment, and something in his gaze made her want to look away, to hide, to be anywhere but standing there under that searching scrutiny. Finally, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down," he said, and his voice was rough like gravel, like a man who spent more time talking to horses than to people. "But not for what you were thinking." Katherine hesitated, confused, then lowered herself into the chair with a wariness born of hard experience. Men said all sorts of things in saloons, made all sorts of promises, and rarely meant any of them when morning came. "Then what do you want?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Your name," he said simply. "Your real name." Something cold slithered down her spine. No one asked for real names in places like this. Real names meant real people with real histories, and the whole point of the Golden Rose was that none of that mattered. Here, she was simply Kitty, or Red, or whatever the customers wanted to call her. Here, her past did not exist. "Katherine," she found herself saying, the name feeling strange on her tongue after so long. "Katherine Ruth." The man went very still. His hand, which had been reaching for his whiskey glass, froze halfway across the table. When he looked up again, his face had gone pale beneath the dust and stubble. "Ruth," he repeated slowly. "What was your father's name?" Now it was Katherine's turn to freeze. Her father was a ghost, a memory she had tried to bury so deep that thinking of him felt like touching a raw wound. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. "Because I think I know him," the man said, and there was something in his expression that might have been pity or might have been regret. "Reverend Josiah Ruth, out of Prescott, has a church up in the mountains, serves the mining camps and the ranches, talks about his daughter sometimes when he comes into town for supplies. Says she ran away 4 years ago when she was barely 18. Says he has been looking for her ever since." Katherine felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. The noise of the saloon faded to a distant roar, and all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Josiah Ruth, her father, the man she had fled from in shame and terror, convinced that he could never forgive her for what she had done, for the mistakes she had made, for the way she had brought disgrace upon his name and his ministry. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but the words came out weak and unconvincing. The man leaned forward, his storm-colored eyes intent on her face. "Your father is dying," he said bluntly. "Consumption. The doctor says he has maybe a month, maybe 2 if he is lucky. He has been asking for you, Catherine. Every day he asks if anyone has news of his daughter." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Catherine gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles going white. "You are lying," she whispered, but she knew he was not. There was too much truth in his voice, too much certainty in his gaze. "My name is Austin Quade," the man said. "I run cattle on the land adjacent to your father's church. He married my parents 30 years ago, baptized me when I was a baby, buried my mother when I was 15. He is a good man, Miss Ruth, maybe the best man I have ever known. And he is dying without ever seeing his daughter again, without ever knowing what happened to her." Tears burned at the back of Catherine's eyes, but she blinked them away furiously. She had learned not to cry in the Golden Rose. Tears were weakness, and weakness got you hurt. "He would not want to see me now," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the piano player starting up a jaunty tune in the corner. "Not like this. Not after what I have become." Austin Quade reached across the table, and before she could pull away, caught her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and the touch sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the transaction she was used to. "Your father does not care about that," he said firmly. "He cares about you. He loves you, and he wants to see you before he dies." Catherine shook her head, pulling her hand free. "You do not understand. I left because I had to. I had done something terrible, something he could never forgive, and I could not face him. I thought it would be better if he just forgot about me, if he could pretend I had never existed." "What did you do that was so terrible?" Austin asked, his voice gentler now. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. The memory was a poisonous thing, festering in her chest. "I was engaged," she said slowly, "to a man from Prescott, a merchant's son. My father was so proud. But the man, he was not what he seemed. He was cruel when no one was looking. He would grab me hard enough to leave bruises, say things that made me feel small and worthless. I tried to tell my father, but the man was so respected in the community, and I had no proof. So I ran. I ran to Phoenix, thinking I could find work, start over. But no one would hire a woman alone with no references. I ran out of money, ran out of options." She swallowed hard. "This was the only place that would take me in." Austin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Your father never stopped looking for you. He blamed himself, thought he should have seen what was happening, should have protected you better. He does not care about what you have had to do to survive, Catherine. He just wants his daughter back." Something broke inside her then, some wall she had built to keep herself together, and the tears came hot and fast down her cheeks. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs she could not control. Around them, the saloon continued its raucous business, but Austin Quade sat there quietly, waiting for the storm to pass. When she finally looked up, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she felt clearer somehow, as though crying had washed away some of the grime that had accumulated on her soul. "How would I even get there?" she asked. "I have no money, no horse. And Silas would never let me leave. He says I owe him for room and board, that I am bound to work here until the debt is paid." Austin's jaw tightened. "How much do you owe?" Catherine laughed, a bitter sound. "Who knows? He adds to it faster than I can work it off. It is a trap, and we both know it." Austin stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stay here," he said. Then he walked across the saloon to where Silas stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with a dirty rag. Catherine watched as the 2 men spoke, their voices too low for her to hear over the noise. Silas's face went from skeptical to angry to calculating, and then Austin reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out bills onto the bar, more money than Katherine had seen in one place in years. Silas scooped up the cash, counted it again, then nodded and jerked his thumb toward the stairs. Austin came back to the table. "Go pack whatever you have," he said. "You are leaving tonight." Katherine stared at him. "You paid him? You paid my debt?" "I bought out your contract," Austin corrected. "You do not owe him anything now. You are free to go." "But why?" Katherine asked, bewildered. "You do not even know me." Austin looked at her steadily. "Because your father is my friend, and he deserves to see his daughter before he dies. Because no woman should be trapped in a place like this against her will. And because," he hesitated, something flickering in his eyes that she could not quite read, "because it is the right thing to do." Katherine did not have much to pack. 3 dresses, a few undergarments, a hairbrush with missing bristles, and a small Bible that her father had given her on her 16th birthday, which she had somehow managed to keep through everything. She stuffed it all into a worn carpet bag, changed into her simplest dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days, and came back down the stairs. The other women watched her go with expressions ranging from envy to resentment to something that might have been hope. Austin was waiting by the door, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol as though he expected trouble. When he saw her, he nodded and pushed open the door, letting in a blast of hot desert air that smelled of dust and creosote. Outside, 2 horses were tied to the hitching post, a big roan gelding and a smaller paint mare. Austin helped her into the saddle, his hands strong and sure, and then swung up onto his own mount. "It is a 2-day ride to Prescott," he said. "We will camp tonight and reach your father's place by tomorrow evening." Katherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As they rode out of Fort McDowell, the lights of the Golden Rose fading behind them, she felt as though she were waking from a long nightmare. The night air was cooler away from the town, and above them the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds spilled on black velvet. They rode in silence for several hours, following a trail that led north through the desert scrubland. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to light their way, and the horses moved with the steady rhythm of animals accustomed to long distances. Katherine had ridden as a girl, before everything fell apart, and the familiar motion of the horse beneath her was oddly comforting. When they finally stopped to make camp, Austin chose a spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods near a small creek. The water ran shallow but clear, and the sound of it was soothing after the harsh silence of the desert. Austin unsaddled the horses and hobbled them where they could graze on the sparse grass, then built a small fire and put coffee on to boil. From his saddlebags he produced jerky and hardtack, which they ate without speaking. Katherine sat on her bedroll, staring into the flames, her mind whirling with thoughts of her father. What would he look like after 4 years? Would he be angry with her? Disappointed? Or would he be, as Austin claimed, simply glad to see her alive? The uncertainty gnawed at her. "Tell me about him," she said finally. "My father. What is he like now?" Austin poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "He is thinner than he was," he said, sitting down across the fire from her. "The sickness has taken a toll. But his spirit is still strong. He still preaches every Sunday, still visits the sick and the dying. The miners love him. He does not judge them for their rough ways or their drinking. He just loves them, and they can feel it." Katherine's eyes filled with tears again. "That sounds like him," she said softly. "He always said that God's love was for everyone, not just the respectable people." "He talks about you," Austin continued. "Not in a sad way exactly, but like you are still part of his life. He tells stories about when you were little, things you said or did. He has kept your room exactly as it was when you left. Says he wants it to be ready when you come home." The tears spilled over, and Katherine did not bother to wipe them away this time. "I was so sure he would hate me," she whispered. I thought I had ruined everything." Austin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Fathers do not stop loving their children, Miss Ruth. Not the good ones, anyway." They finished their coffee in silence, and then Austin banked the fire and laid out his own bedroll on the opposite side of the small clearing. "Get some rest," he said. "We have a long day tomorrow." Catherine lay down and pulled her thin blanket over herself, staring up at the stars through the branches of the cottonwoods. She could hear the horses moving nearby, the sound of the creek, and Austin's steady breathing from across the fire. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something that might have been peace. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Austin was crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast. When he saw her sitting up, he nodded. "Morning," he said. "We should eat and get moving. I want to make good time today." They ate quickly, then saddled the horses and set out again. The trail led them up out of the desert and into the foothills, where the landscape changed from saguaro and creosote to juniper and piñon pine. The air grew cooler and cleaner, and Catherine felt as though she could breathe properly for the first time in years. As they rode, Austin began to talk, telling her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the hands he employed. He spoke about the difficulties of ranching in Arizona, the droughts and the hard winters, the constant threat of rustlers and wild animals. Catherine found herself relaxing, asking questions, even laughing at some of his stories about ornery steers and stubborn horses. "How old are you?" she asked at one point, curious about this man who had so abruptly changed the course of her life. 28, he replied. "Been ranching since I was 16, when my father died and left me the land." "That is young to take on so much responsibility," Catherine observed. Austin shrugged. "Did not have much choice. It was either make the ranch work or lose everything my father had built. Your father helped me a lot in those early years. He would come by and check on me, make sure I was eating properly and not working myself to death. He even helped me round up cattle once when I was short-handed." Catherine smiled at the image of her father, a man of God, helping with a cattle drive. "That sounds like something he would do." "He is a good man," Austin said again, and there was a note of finality in his voice that suggested he considered this the highest praise he could offer. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Catherine sat on a rock, looking out over the valley below them. The land spread out in all directions, vast and empty and beautiful in a harsh kind of way. She had forgotten how much she loved the Arizona landscape, how it got into your blood and made everywhere else seem tame by comparison. "What are you thinking?" Austin asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I miss this," Catherine said. "I miss the mountains, the clean air, the space. In Fort McDowell, everything felt cramped and dirty. Here you can see for miles." Austin nodded. "It is a good land, a hard land, but a good one. You can make something of yourself here if you are willing to work for it." "What will I do after?" Catherine asked, the question that had been nagging at her all morning finally coming out. "After I see my father, I mean. I cannot stay with him. He will be gone soon. And then what? I have no money, no prospects. I cannot go back to Fort McDowell, but I do not know where else to go." Austin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You could stay in Prescott. There are families there who would hire a woman to help with children or housework, respectable work." "Do you think they would hire me if they knew where I had been?" Catherine asked bitterly. "What I had been doing?" "They do not need to know," Austin said firmly. "That is in your past now. You are starting fresh." Catherine wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her not to hope for too much. Still, the idea of a different future, a life beyond the Golden Rose, was intoxicating. They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The pines grew thicker here, and the air smelled of resin and earth. They passed a few isolated ranches, herds of cattle grazing on the hillsides, and once a freight wagon heading down the mountain loaded with ore from the mines. The driver tipped his hat to them as he passed, and Austin raised his hand in greeting. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Austin pointed ahead to where a small valley opened up between two ridges. "There," he said. "That is where your father's church is." Catherine's heart began to pound. In the distance, she could see a small white building with a steeple, and beside it, a modest house. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray line against the darkening sky. Suddenly, she was terrified. What if her father rejected her? What if Austin was wrong, and he could not forgive her after all? What if she had come all this way only to be turned away? As if sensing her fear, Austin reached over and touched her arm briefly. "It will be all right," he said. "I promise." They rode down into the valley as the last light faded from the sky. Lamps had been lit in the house, golden light spilling from the windows. Austin dismounted and tied his horse to the fence, then came around to help Catherine down. Her legs felt shaky, and she had to hold on to the saddle for a moment to steady herself. "Do you want me to go in first?" Austin asked gently. "Let him know you are here?" Catherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Austin walked up to the door and knocked, and after a moment it opened. An older woman stood there, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. She looked at Austin with recognition and then concern. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson," Austin said. "Is the Reverend awake?" "He is, though he is very weak today," the woman replied. She was the housekeeper, Catherine realized, someone her father must have hired after she left. "Come in, Austin." "I brought someone to see him," Austin said, and he turned and gestured to Catherine. She stepped forward into the light, and Mrs. Patterson gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Is that Catherine?" Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. "He has been praying for this day," she said. "Come in, child. Come in." Catherine followed Austin into the house. It looked just as she remembered, simple and clean, with worn furniture and shelves lined with books. The smell of it, of wood smoke and old paper and something indefinable that was just her father, hit her like a physical blow. Mrs. Patterson led them down a short hallway to a bedroom. She knocked softly and then opened the door. "Reverend," she said gently. "You have visitors." Catherine stepped into the room and saw her father for the first time in 4 years. He was lying in bed, propped up on pillows, and he looked so much smaller than she remembered, so much frailer. His hair had gone completely white, and his face was thin and drawn. But his eyes, those kind brown eyes that had always looked at her with such love, were the same. He stared at her for a long moment, as though he could not quite believe what he was seeing. Then he said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "Katie, is that really you?" Catherine burst into tears and ran to the bed, falling to her knees beside it. Her father's thin arms came around her, and she buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing like a child. "I am so sorry, Papa," she choked out. "I am so sorry for everything." "Hush, my darling girl," her father murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "You are home now. That is all that matters. You are home." They stayed like that for a long time, Catherine crying and her father holding her, until finally the storm of emotion passed. Catherine pulled back, wiping her face with her hands. Her father looked at her with such love and joy that it made her want to cry all over again. "Let me look at you," he said, his trembling hands coming up to cup her face. "My beautiful girl, I have missed you so much." "I missed you too, Papa," Catherine said. "I wanted to come home, but I was so ashamed. I thought you would hate me for what I had become." Her father shook his head. "Nothing you could do would make me hate you, Katie. Nothing. You are my daughter, and I love you. That will never change, no matter what." Catherine became aware that Austin and Mrs. Patterson had quietly left the room, giving them privacy. She pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down, holding her father's hand. It felt so thin and fragile, the bones prominent beneath the papery skin. Austin told me you are sick, she said, her voice catching on the words. I am dying, Katie, her father said matter-of-factly. But now that you are here, I can die in peace. That is all I wanted, to see you one more time, to tell you that I love you and that I am proud of you. Proud of me? Catherine asked, incredulous. How can you be proud of me after what I have done? Because you survived, her father said simply. Because you did what you had to do to stay alive. God does not judge us for what we do in desperation, Katie. He judges us for the contents of our hearts, and your heart is good. It always has been. They talked late into the night, Catherine telling her father everything that had happened since she left, and her father listening without judgment, only love. He told her about the years since she had been gone, about the people in the community who had asked after her, about his illness and how he had made peace with his approaching death. When Catherine finally left him to sleep, it was well past midnight, and she felt exhausted but lighter somehow, as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Mrs. Patterson showed her to her old room, which was indeed exactly as she had left it. Her quilt was still on the bed, her books still on the shelf, even her old hairbrush still on the dresser. Catherine sat on the bed, looking around at the remnants of her former life, and felt tears prickling at her eyes again. There was a soft knock on the door, and Austin stuck his head in. Just wanted to make sure you are all right, he said. Come in, Catherine said, and he entered, closing the door behind him. I wanted to thank you, she continued, for everything you have done. You gave me back my father. You gave me back my life. Austin looked uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what needed to be done, he said. It was more than that, Catherine insisted. You did not have to help me. You could have just told my father where I was and let him send someone else, but you came yourself and you paid my debt and you brought me home. Why? Austin was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. When I saw you in that saloon, all I could think about was how your father had described you. He talked about a girl who loved to read, who was kind to everyone, who had dreams of becoming a teacher someday. And then I saw what you had become, not because you wanted to, but because you had no other choice, and it made me angry. Angry at a world that would let that happen to a good person. So I helped because I wanted to prove that the world could be better than that people could be better than that. Catherine stood up and crossed the room to where he stood. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled cheek. You are a good man, Austin Quade, she said softly. Something shifted in Austin's eyes, and suddenly the air between them felt charged, electric. He reached up and covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that Catherine's breath caught in her throat. I should let you rest, Austin said, his voice rough. He stepped back, breaking the moment. Good night, Catherine. Good night, she whispered, and watched as he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Catherine lay down on her old bed, but sleep was a long time coming. She kept thinking about Austin, about the way he had looked at her, the way his kiss had felt against her palm. She had been with men in the Golden Rose, but that had been transactions, emotionless and mechanical. This was different. This made her feel things she had thought were dead inside her. The next morning, Catherine woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of chickens clucking in the yard. She dressed and went out to the kitchen, where Mrs. Patterson was making breakfast. Good morning, dear, the older woman said warmly. Your father is still sleeping, but he had a better night than he has had in weeks. I think having you here has given him renewed strength. Catherine helped Mrs. Patterson with breakfast, and when Austin came in from tending to the horses, they all sat down together to eat. It felt strange and wonderful to be part of a household again, to have this sense of normalcy after so long. Over the next few days, Catherine settled into a routine. She spent most of her time with her father, sitting beside his bed and talking or reading to him from his favorite books. Sometimes they would pray together, and Catherine found that the words came easier than she expected, that despite everything, she had not lost her faith entirely. Austin stayed as well, sleeping in the small bunkhouse behind the church. During the day, he helped with chores around the property, fixing a section of fence that had fallen down, repairing the leaky roof of the church, chopping wood for the winter ahead. Catherine found herself watching him work, admiring the easy strength of his movements, the way he approached every task with quiet competence. In the evenings, after her father had fallen asleep, Catherine and Austin would sit on the porch and talk. They spoke about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their lives, their dreams, and fears and hopes for the future. Catherine learned that Austin had once been engaged himself to a woman from Prescott, but she had broken it off when she decided she wanted a city life instead of a ranch wife's existence. "Did you love her?" Catherine asked one evening, watching the stars come out overhead. Austin considered the question. "I thought I did at the time," he said. "But now I think it was more that I liked the idea of having someone, of not being alone. She did not really see me, not the real me. She saw a rancher with property, someone who could give her a comfortable life, but she did not care about the things I cared about." "What do you care about?" Catherine asked softly. Austin looked at her, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, his eyes were very blue. "Honesty," he said. "Loyalty. Kindness. Doing right by people even when it is hard. The land and the animals and the work. Simple things, maybe. But they matter to me." "They are not simple things," Catherine said. "They are the most important things." As the days passed, Catherine's father grew weaker. There were times when he was lucid and could talk with her, and times when he drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in memories or dreams. Catherine treasured every moment she had with him, knowing that their time together was running out. One afternoon, when her father was having a good day, he asked to speak with Austin. Catherine left them alone, and when Austin emerged an hour later, his expression was thoughtful and a little sad. "What did he want to talk about?" Catherine asked. "He wanted to make sure you would be taken care of after he is gone," Austin said. "He asked me to promise that I would look after you, help you get settled somewhere safe." "What did you say?" Catherine asked, though she thought she already knew. "I promised," Austin said simply. "Of course I promised." That night, Catherine could not sleep. She kept thinking about what would happen after her father died, about the uncertain future that lay ahead. Finally, she got up and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, then slipped outside. The night air was cool and crisp, autumn beginning to assert itself in the mountains. She was surprised to find Austin sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the darkness. He glanced up when he heard her approach. "Could not sleep either?" he asked. "Too much on my mind," Catherine admitted. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I am scared, Austin. Scared of losing my father. Scared of what comes after. I feel like I just got my life back, and now it is all going to fall apart again." Austin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What if it did not have to fall apart? What if there was another option?" Catherine looked at him, her heart beginning to beat faster. "What do you mean?" Austin turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. His palms were warm and calloused, and his grip was strong but gentle. "Catherine, I know we have not known each other long, less than a week, really, but in that time, I have come to care about you more than I thought possible. You are brave and strong and kind, and you have been through things that would have broken most people, but you are still here. You are still fighting, and I want to be part of that fight. I want to help you build a new life, a good life." "Austin, what are you saying?" Catherine whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I am saying that I want you to come back to my ranch with me," Austin said. As my wife, if you will have me. I know it is fast, and I know you might not feel the same way about me, but I had to ask. I could not let you go without telling you how I feel." Catherine felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy, not sadness. "You want to marry me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Even knowing where I have been, what I have done. I want to marry you because of who you are, not in spite of what you have been through," Austin said firmly. "Your past does not define you, Catherine. What defines you is your courage, your heart, your capacity to love even after everything. And I would be honored if you would let me spend the rest of my life proving to you how much you are worth." Catherine threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "Yes," she said against his shoulder. "Yes, I will marry you. Austin Quade. I will marry you and build a life with you and be so grateful every day that you walked into the Golden Rose that night." Austin pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, and then he kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, nothing like the rough, impersonal kisses she had endured in her previous life. This kiss tasted of hope and new beginnings, and Catherine felt something deep inside her that had been broken start to heal. They told her father the next morning, and the joy on his face was worth everything. He insisted on performing the ceremony himself, even though he was barely strong enough to sit up in bed. Mrs. Patterson and a few of the neighbors were called in to serve as witnesses, and in the small bedroom where her father lay dying, Katherine Ruth became Catherine Quade. Austin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands steady and sure, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with such tenderness that Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. Her father was crying too, tears of happiness rolling down his thin cheeks. "I am so glad I lived to see this," he whispered to Catherine afterward when she knelt beside his bed. "So glad to know you will be loved and cared for. Austin is a good man, Katie. He will make you happy." "He already has, Papa," Catherine said, taking her father's hand. "He already has." Reverend Josiah Ruth died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep, with Catherine sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. The funeral was held in his church, and it seemed like half of Prescott turned out to pay their respects. Catherine was amazed by how many lives her father had touched, how many people spoke of his kindness and his wisdom and his unwavering faith. Austin stood beside her throughout the service, his hand holding hers, his presence a rock she could lean on. When they lowered her father into the ground in the small cemetery behind the church, Catherine wept. But there was peace mixed with her grief. She had gotten to see him again, to tell him she loved him, to know that he forgave her and was proud of her. That was more than many people got, and she would be grateful for it for the rest of her life. After the funeral, there were matters to settle. Her father had left the house and a small sum of money to Catherine, with instructions that the church and its contents should go to the diocese. Catherine and Austin spent a week sorting through her father's belongings, keeping what was meaningful and donating the rest. It was bittersweet work, touching the objects her father had used every day, reading through his journals and seeing his thoughts written out in his careful handwriting. One evening, Catherine found a letter tucked into her father's Bible with her name on the envelope. With shaking hands, she opened it and read, "My dearest Katie, if you are reading this, then you have come home and I am gone. I want you to know that the time we had together, however brief, was the greatest gift God could have given me. To see your face again, to hold you, and tell you how much I love you, was worth more than all the years I spent searching. I do not know what path your life will take from here, but I know that God has great plans for you. You have a good heart, Katie, and a strong spirit. Do not let the past hold you back from the future. You deserve happiness. You deserve love. You deserve all the beautiful things this world has to offer. I am so proud of the woman you have become. Be brave, my darling girl. Be kind. Be true to yourself. And know that wherever you go, whatever you do, I will always love you. Your Papa." By the time Catherine finished reading, she was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Austin found her there and gathered her into his arms, letting her cry until there were no tears left. He loved you so much, Austin murmured against her hair. And he knew you loved him too. That is what matters. Finally, when everything was settled and the house had been closed up, Katherine and Austin prepared to leave for his ranch. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to stay on as caretaker of the property until the diocese decided what to do with it. On their last morning, Katherine stood in the doorway of her childhood home, looking back at the rooms where she had grown up, where she had said goodbye to her father for the final time. "Ready?" Austin asked gently. Katherine took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready," she said. She was ready to leave the past behind and step into her future. The ride to Austin's ranch took most of a day, traveling west from Prescott through rolling hills dotted with cattle. As they crested a ridge in the late afternoon, Austin pointed down into a valley where a cluster of buildings sat beside a creek lined with cottonwoods. "There," he said. "That is home." Katherine looked at the ranch spread out below them. At the sturdy house with its wide porch, the barn, and corrals, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. It looked like something out of a dream, solid and real and welcoming. As they rode down into the valley, a dog came bounding out to meet them, barking joyfully. A moment later, a man emerged from the barn, middle-aged and weather-beaten, with a broad smile on his face. "Boss," he called. "Good to see you back. We were starting to worry." "Everything all right here, Tom?" Austin asked, dismounting and shaking the man's hand. "Quiet as church," Tom replied. Then he noticed Katherine and swept his hat off his head. "Madam." "Tom, this is my wife, Katherine," Austin said, and Katherine heard the pride in his voice. "Katherine, this is Tom Brennan, my foreman." Tom's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he recovered quickly. "Well, I will be. Congratulations to you both. Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. Quade." Over the next few days, Katherine met the rest of Austin's ranch hands, a mixed group of young cowboys and older, more experienced men who had been with Austin for years. They were rough around the edges, most of them, but they treated her with respect and genuine warmth. She got the sense that they were happy to see their boss married, that they thought it would be good for him to have someone to share his life with. The ranch house was larger than Katherine had expected, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a parlor with a stone fireplace. It was sparsely furnished, decorated with the practical mindset of a bachelor, but Katherine could see its potential. She spent the first few weeks cleaning and organizing, hanging curtains she sewed herself, arranging wildflowers in vases, slowly transforming the house into a home. Austin gave her free rein, seeming pleased by every change she made. He was gone during the day, working with his men to move cattle or mend fences or do any of the 1,000 tasks that running a ranch required. But every evening, he came home to her, and they would have dinner together and then sit on the porch as the sun set, talking about their days. Katherine found that she loved ranch life. She loved the rhythm of it, the way each season brought different tasks and challenges. She took over the vegetable garden, planting squash and beans and tomatoes. She learned to bake bread in the big wood stove, to churn butter, to preserve food for the winter. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and every night she fell into bed exhausted and satisfied in a way she had never been in Fort McDowell. But more than anything, she loved being married to Austin. He was patient and kind, never pushing her, always giving her space to adjust to her new life. In bed, he was gentle, taking his time to show her that physical intimacy could be about love and connection, not just transaction. Katherine had not known that her body could feel pleasure, that being touched could make her feel cherished rather than used. Austin taught her these things with infinite tenderness, and gradually, the walls she had built around her heart came down completely. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Katherine told Austin something she had been keeping to herself for a few weeks. "I am with child," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Austin's face lit up with such joy that Katherine felt her eyes fill with tears. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Truly? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Truly, Katherine confirmed. The baby should come in the spring. Austin pulled back and cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away the tears that had spilled over. You have made me so happy, he said. So incredibly happy. That night, as they lay in bed together, Austin's hand resting protectively over her stomach, Katherine thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. She had gone from being a woman without hope, trapped in a life she despised, to being a wife and soon to be mother, living on a beautiful ranch with a man who loved her. It felt like a miracle, like something she did not quite deserve, but would spend the rest of her life being grateful for. The winter was mild that year, and Katherine spent it preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, fixing up one of the spare bedrooms as a nursery. Austin was endlessly attentive, worrying over her health, making sure she did not work too hard. Tom and the other ranch hands were equally solicitous, treating her like she was made of glass. I am pregnant, not sick, Katherine protested one day when Austin tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I know, Austin said, grinning. But humor me. I have never had a wife and baby before, and I want to make sure I do it right. Katherine laughed and kissed him. You are doing it perfectly, she assured him. When spring came, so did the baby, arriving on a warm April morning with the windows open and birdsong drifting in from outside. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Jensen, attended the birth along with Austin, who refused to leave Katherine's side despite Mrs. Jensen's suggestion that he might prefer to wait outside. It was hard work, harder than anything Katherine had ever done, but when she finally heard her baby's first cry and felt the midwife place the tiny, squirming bundle on her chest, every bit of pain was forgotten. She looked down at her son, his face red and scrunched and absolutely perfect, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. A boy, Mrs. Jensen announced with satisfaction. A fine, healthy boy. Austin was crying, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he looked at his son. He is beautiful, he whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately gripped his father's finger, and Austin made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Look at that. He is already strong. They named him Josiah, after Katherine's father, and the baby thrived from the very beginning. He was a good-natured child, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and Austin was completely besotted with him. Katherine would often find her husband in the nursery in the early morning hours, just standing over the cradle watching their son sleep, a look of wonder on his face. As little Josiah grew, the ranch prospered as well. Austin made some smart business decisions, expanding his herd and buying additional grazing land. Katherine started keeping chickens and selling eggs in town, and she planted a larger garden, preserving enough food to last through the winter and still have extra to sell or trade. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Josiah was 2 years old, Katherine found herself pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, in the middle of a snowstorm with Austin and Mrs. Jensen once again in attendance. The babies came early and were small, and there were some tense hours when Katherine and Austin worried that they might not survive. But both children proved to be fighters, and within a few weeks, they were nursing well and gaining weight. They named the boy Matthew and the girl Sarah, and suddenly the ranch house was full of noise and laughter and chaos. Katherine's days became a whirlwind of feeding and changing and soothing, but she would not have traded it for anything. Austin hired a young woman from town to come help with the housework and the children, giving Katherine some time to breathe, and together they navigated the challenges of raising 3 small children. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Katherine and Austin would still sit on the porch and watch the stars come out, just as they had in the early days of their marriage. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, and marvel at how much their lives had changed. Do you ever think about Fort McDowell? Austin asked one night. About what your life was like before? Katherine considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but it feels like it happened to someone else, like I am remembering a story I heard rather than something I lived through. This is my real life here with you and the children. Everything before was just waiting for this to begin. Austin took her hand, bringing it to his lips. I am glad I found you that night, he said. Glad I had the courage to walk into that saloon and ask for your name. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Quade. You saved my life, Katherine said softly. You gave me everything, Austin. A home, a family, a reason to hope again. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that. You do not owe me gratitude, Austin said, pulling her close. You are my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. You are my equal in every way, and I love you more than I ever thought possible to love another person. Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land they had built their life on. The ranch stretched around them, solid and real, a testament to hard work and determination and love. Her father had been right, she thought. God did have plans for her, plans for a future she could never have imagined in the darkest days of her past. The years passed peacefully. The children grew strong and healthy, running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Josiah was quiet and thoughtful like his grandfather, often found with a book in his hands. Matthew was adventurous and fearless, always climbing things and getting into mischief. Sarah was sweet and nurturing, mothering the ranch animals and helping Katherine in the kitchen. When Josiah was 7, Katherine gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Ruth, after both Katherine's maiden name and Austin's mother. And 2 years after that, a final son arrived, Samuel, completing their family at 6 children. The ranch grew along with the family. Austin's reputation as a fair dealer and an honest rancher spread, and he began supplying beef to several of the mining camps around Prescott. Katherine started a small business of her own, raising sheep for wool and teaching some of the women in the area how to spin and weave. It gave her something of her own, separate from the ranch and the children, and Austin encouraged her fully. One autumn day, when Katherine was in town selling wool, she ran into a woman she recognized from Fort McDowell. The woman, Clara, had been one of the other girls at the Golden Rose, and she looked thinner and more worn than Katherine remembered. When Clara saw Katherine, her eyes widened in surprise and then filled with tears. Kitty? She said uncertainly, using Katherine's old name. Is that really you? It is Katherine now, Katherine said gently. Katherine Quade. How are you, Clara? Clara looked down at her shabby dress and laughed bitterly. Same as always. Still at the Golden Rose. Silas says I will be there until I am too old to work, and then he will throw me out. But you got out. How did you manage it? Katherine hesitated, then said, I had help. A good man helped me, and I took the chance when it came. Clara, it is not too late for you either. There are ways out if you want them. Who would help someone like me? Clara asked hopelessly. I would, Katherine said firmly. She pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down the address of the ranch. If you ever decide you want something different, you come find me. We will figure something out together. I promise. Clara took the paper with shaking hands. Why would you do that for me? Because someone did it for me, Katherine said simply, and because everyone deserves a second chance. Clara never came to the ranch, but Katherine heard through the town grapevine that she had left the Golden Rose a few months later and gotten work as a seamstress in Prescott. It was a small thing, but it made Katherine feel like maybe she had made a difference, had passed on some of the kindness that had been shown to her. As the children grew older, Katherine told them about their grandfather, about Reverend Josiah Ruth, and the work he had done among the miners and ranchers of Arizona. She did not tell them the full story of where she had been or what she had done before she married their father, but she did teach them about grace and forgiveness, about how no one was beyond redemption, about how love could heal even the deepest wounds. On Sundays, the family would ride into Prescott for church services, sitting together in a pew and singing hymns. Catherine thought her father would have been proud to see his grandchildren growing up with faith, proud of the life she had built. Time moved on, as it always does. The children grew into young adults, fell in love, and started families of their own. Josiah became a teacher, fulfilling the dream Catherine had once had for herself. Matthew took over running the ranch when Austin decided to step back, proving himself to be a capable and innovative rancher. Sarah married a doctor and moved to Phoenix, where she helped run a clinic for poor families. Ruth became a nurse and Samuel studied law. Through it all, Catherine and Austin remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love for each other never diminished, only grew stronger and deeper with each passing year. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, their house always full of visiting family and the sound of children's laughter. One evening when they were both well into their 70s, Catherine and Austin sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times before. Austin's hair was white now, and his movements were slower, but his eyes were still the same storm gray that had captivated Catherine that night in the Golden Rose so many decades before. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" Catherine asked, her hand in his. "I remember every moment I have spent with you," Austin said. "Every single one has been a gift." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I would have this," she said softly. "A long life, a family, so much love. That night in Fort McDowell, I thought my life was over, that I would die alone and forgotten. And then you walked in and changed everything. We saved each other," Austin said. "You needed someone to believe in you, and I needed someone to believe in. We were both looking for something without knowing what it was, and we found it in each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, the cattle bedding down, the chickens roosting, the world preparing for night. "I love you, Austin Quade," Catherine said, the words as true and heartfelt as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too, Catherine Quade," Austin replied, kissing the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Catherine thought about the long, unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. From minister's daughter to saloon girl to rancher's wife to matriarch of a large and loving family, her life had taken turns she never could have predicted. But through it all, through every hardship and triumph, she had learned that redemption was possible, that love could conquer shame, and that it was never too late to come home. Years later, when Katherine Quade passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they buried her next to Austin, who had died just 6 months earlier, in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her headstone read simply, "Katherine Ruth Quade, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, saved by grace, sustained by love." And on quiet evenings when the wind blew through the valley and the cattle lowed softly in the distance, some said you could still see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, bound by a love that not even death could diminish. The ranch continued through the generations, passed down from Matthew to his children, and then to theirs, each one maintaining the values that Austin and Catherine had instilled: honesty, hard work, kindness, and above all, the belief that every person deserved compassion and a second chance. The story of how Catherine and Austin met became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The details softened over time, as stories do, but the essential truth remained, that two broken people had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built something beautiful together. That love had triumphed over shame and fear and despair. That coming home, whether to a place or a person, was always worth the journey. In Prescott, a small brass plaque was eventually placed in the church where Reverend Josiah Ruth had preached, commemorating his years of service to the community. His grandchildren, and great-grandchildren would visit it sometimes, laying flowers and remembering the man who had loved so completely that his love had reached out beyond death to save his daughter and set her on a path to happiness. The Golden Rose Saloon in Fort McDowell burned down in 1895, and no one bothered to rebuild it. The town itself dwindled as the mines played out, until eventually it was just a scatter of abandoned buildings slowly being reclaimed by the desert. But the story of the girl who had worked there and been saved by a cowboy with a good heart lived on, passed down as a reminder that no situation was ever truly hopeless, that kindness could change lives, and that love, when it was real and true, had the power to transform everything it touched. As for Austin and Katherine themselves, their love story became the foundation on which their descendants built their own lives. They learned from it that courage meant taking chances on people, that mercy was more powerful than judgment, and that the truest measure of a person was not where they came from or what they had done, but who they chose to be when given the opportunity for redemption. These lessons shaped generations, spreading out like ripples in a pond, touching lives far beyond the original source. On the ranch that Austin built and Katherine transformed into a home, life continued its eternal cycle. Children were born and grew and had children of their own. Cattle were raised and sold. Crops were planted and harvested. And through it all, the memory of the couple who had started it all remained strong, a touchstone for everyone who came after. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of love that saw past surfaces to the truth beneath, of courage in the face of shame and despair. It was a testament to the power of human connection, to the way one person's compassion could change the trajectory of another's entire life. And it was a reminder that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come, bringing with it hope and the possibility of new beginnings. In the end, that was the legacy Katherine and Austin left behind. Not just land and cattle and a family name, but the unshakable belief that every person mattered, that everyone deserved love and dignity, and that it was never too late to come home, to be forgiven, to start again. Their love story, born in the dusty streets of Fort McDowell and fulfilled on a ranch in the Arizona mountains, became a beacon for all who heard it, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the darkest places, love could find a way. And so the years turned into decades, and the decades into a century, and still the story endured, passed from generation to generation like a precious heirloom. The ranch house where Katherine and Austin had raised their children still stood, weathered but strong, a monument to their love and their legacy. And on summer evenings when the family gathered for reunions and the children played in the yard while the adults talked on the porch, you could almost feel the presence of that long-ago couple, their love still radiating out to touch everyone who came after them, still teaching the lessons they had learned through their own unlikely journey. That grace was real, that redemption was possible, and that love, true love, could overcome anything.